They skipped Father's Day, then asked me for money, and got my husband's shock at Christmas. Father's Day came and went without a single call. No messages, no visits, not even a simple Happy Father's Day for my husband. Our children were always too busy. Too busy for dinner, too busy for family, too busy for the man who spent decades building everything they enjoyed. But a few months later, suddenly they had time. Right before Christmas, they showed up at our door smiling, hugging us like nothing had happened. Then came the real reason for the visit. They needed money for a business opportunity. I stayed quiet while they explained their plans. My husband listened patiently the entire time. Then Christmas morning arrived. And that was the moment my husband finally gave them an answer they would never forget. If this story helps you understand that relationships require effort, not just convenience, please like and subscribe. There are moments when pattern of behavior becomes so clear that you can no longer rationalize it away. When accumulated evidence of being valued only for what you can provide rather than for who you are creates recognition that relationship you thought was genuine was actually transactional. When people you've sacrificed for demonstrate through their choices that they view you as resource rather than as person deserving of basic respect and attention. For my husband David and me, that moment of clarity came when our 3 adult children, who'd been too busy to call or visit or even send text message on Father's Day, suddenly found time to visit us in December when they needed $150,000 for business investment they wanted our financial backing for. The contrast between their complete absence when we'd wanted nothing from them except acknowledgement and their enthusiastic presence when they wanted substantial amount of money had been so stark that even I, who'd been making excuses for their neglect for years, couldn't rationalize it away anymore. David had listened patiently to their pitch, had asked thoughtful questions about their business plans, had given no indication of what he was thinking or what his answer would be. And then on Christmas morning, he'd given them response that would fundamentally change our family dynamics and would teach them expensive lesson about taking people for granted. My name is Carol Jensen, and I'm 68 years old. My husband David is 72, retired business owner who'd built successful regional construction company that he'd sold 5 years earlier for substantial sum that had funded our comfortable retirement. We had 3 children, Brian, who was 43, Jennifer, who was 40, and Michael, who was 37, all of whom we'd raised with every advantage we could provide, all of whom had attended good universities that we'd paid for, all of whom had received substantial financial help over the years as they'd established their careers and their families. The pattern that had developed over the years our children had been adults was that they were consistently too busy for us unless they needed something. They'd cancel family dinners at the last minute because work or their children's activities took priority. They'd go months without calling or visiting despite living in the same metro area. They'd respond to our invitations with vague promises to get together soon that rarely materialized into actual plans. But when they needed help, financial assistance, free childcare, connections David could provide through his business network, they'd suddenly have time for us, would be warm and attentive and engaged until they'd gotten what they needed, and then would fade back into being too busy once the crisis or the need had passed. Father's Day that year had been particularly painful crystallization of this pattern. David had been hoping our children would at least call or send card, had been disappointed but not entirely surprised when the day had passed without any contact from any of them. Brian had texted 3 days later saying he'd totally forgot about Father's Day because of work stress and his kids' activities. Jennifer had sent nothing at all. Michael had called week later claiming his phone had been broken and he'd lost track of dates. The excuses had been flimsy and had made clear that acknowledging their father on Father's Day simply hadn't been priority for any of them, that they couldn't be bothered to spend 5 minutes sending card or making call to the man who'd spent decades providing for them and supporting them. I'd watched David process this rejection quietly, had seen hurt in his eyes even though he hadn't said much about it, had noticed him becoming more withdrawn and more quiet in the weeks following Father's Day, as he'd apparently been reconsidering his relationships with our children and what those relationships actually meant to them. He'd started making comments about feeling taken for granted, about wondering whether our children actually valued him as person or just valued his wallet and his connections, about questioning whether the financial support we'd been providing over the years had actually been helping them or had been enabling them to avoid building their own financial independence while treating us as ATM rather than as parents deserving of basic respect and attention. Then December had arrived, and suddenly all three of our children had time for us. They'd called to arrange family dinner, had shown up together with their spouses, had been warm and affectionate, and engaged in ways we hadn't seen from them in months. The conversation over dinner had been pleasant and had eventually turned to Brian's new business venture. He'd been developing commercial real estate investment opportunity with Jennifer and Michael. All three of them were partnering on a project that they were very excited about and that they believed would be highly profitable. As they'd explained the project, it had become clear where the conversation was heading. They needed $150,000 in investment capital to participate in the real estate deal, didn't quite have sufficient funds themselves, were hoping David and I might be interested in investing as partners in the venture. They'd presented detailed business plan, had shown projections about expected returns, had framed the request as investment opportunity we'd be fortunate to participate in, rather than as them asking us for money. I'd stayed quiet throughout the presentation, had watched David's face for reaction that would indicate what he was thinking. But he'd remained neutral and thoughtful, had asked intelligent questions about the business plan and the expected returns and the risks involved, had given no indication of whether he was inclined to provide the money they were asking for or whether he was skeptical about the opportunity. At the end of the dinner, David had said he'd need time to think about the investment, would need to review the business plan more carefully and consult with his financial advisor, would give them his answer in few weeks. Our children had seemed confident that he'd ultimately agree to invest, had thanked him for considering it, had been warm and affectionate as they'd left in ways that felt performative and transactional now that I understood they'd come primarily to ask for money. After they'd left, I'd asked David what he was thinking about their investment request. He'd been quiet for a moment, and then had said something that had surprised me. "I'm thinking about what kind of father I've been, and what kind of children we've raised. I'm thinking about Father's Day, and about 3 people who couldn't find 5 minutes to call me, but who can find hours to pitch me on investment opportunity they need money for. I'm thinking about what lessons they've learned from me and whether I've done them any favors by always being available with money whenever they've needed it, while they've never been available with time or attention when I've needed them." Over the following weeks, David had indeed reviewed the business plan carefully, had consulted with his financial advisor, had done research on the real estate opportunity our children were proposing. The conclusion he'd reached was that the investment was actually fairly sound from purely financial perspective, that the projected returns were realistic, and that the risks were manageable, that if this had been proposal from unrelated business associates, he probably would have considered participating in the venture. But he'd also been doing different kind of evaluation. He'd been reviewing pattern of our children's behavior over the years, documenting how often they contacted us when they didn't need anything versus how often they contacted us when they wanted money or help or connections. He'd been tallying up all the financial assistance we'd provided over the years, the college tuitions we'd paid, the down payments on houses we'd helped with, the business loans we'd extended, the emergencies we'd funded. The total was substantial, well over $400,000 across 3 children over the years they'd been adults. He'd also been reflecting on what we'd received in return for all that financial support and all that sacrifice. Not gratitude or attention or effort to maintain genuine relationship, just expectation that we'd always be available with money whenever they needed it, while they were perpetually too busy to make time for us unless they wanted something. David had decided what his answer would be, but he'd chosen to wait until Christmas to deliver it. He'd told me his plan and had asked if I supported his decision. I'd thought carefully about whether I agreed with what he was proposing, had recognized that it would be painful for all of us, but that it was probably necessary lesson our children needed to learn about relationships and reciprocity, and taking people for granted. I'd told David I supported him and would stand beside him whatever our children's reactions might be. Christmas morning had arrived with our children and their families gathered at our house for traditional celebration we'd maintained for decades. After breakfast and after the children had opened their presents, David had asked our adult children to join him in his study for private conversation while their spouses and children stayed in living room. I'd accompanied them into the study where David had pulled out a folder containing all the research he'd done on their investment opportunity. He'd told them he'd reviewed their business plan thoroughly, had consulted with experts, had determined that the investment opportunity was sound, and that the projected returns were realistic. Our children had brightened, had clearly expected that this was leading to David agreeing to provide the $150,000 they'd requested. But then David had continued. I've also been doing some other evaluation over the past few weeks. I've been reviewing our relationship and thinking about patterns I've noticed over the years. You came to me in December asking for $150,000 to invest in your business opportunity. You were enthusiastic and engaged. You made time for family dinner. You showed interest in connecting with me and your mother. But 6 months earlier, on Father's Day, none of you could find 5 minutes to call or send card or acknowledge me at all. And that contrast, between having no time for me when I wanted nothing from you except basic acknowledgement, and suddenly having plenty of time when you wanted $150,000, has made me realize something important about our relationship. The study had gone very quiet. Our children had been looking uncomfortable, had apparently realized where this was going and that the answer wasn't going to be what they'd expected. David had continued, I've calculated that over the years you've all been adults. Your mother and I have provided approximately $420,000 in financial assistance to the three of you. College tuitions, down payments, business loans, emergency funds. We've been generous with our money because we love you and because we wanted to help you build successful lives. But I've been asking myself what we've received in return for all that generosity. And the answer is, not much. Occasional visits when you need something, canceled plans and missed holidays and months without contact because you're too busy. Complete absence on Father's Day because acknowledging me wasn't priority for any of you. Brian had tried to interrupt, had started to make excuses about how busy they all were with work and family obligations. But David had held up his hand and had continued, I'm not finished. I've made decision about your investment request, and I've also made decision about how your mother and I are going to handle our finances going forward. First, regarding your real estate investment, my answer is no. The investment opportunity is sound, but I'm not going to provide the money. You're all adults with careers and resources, and if this investment is as good as you claim it is, you should be able to fund it yourselves or find other investors who aren't your parents. Second, and more significantly, your mother and I are changing our estate plan. We had been planning to leave our estate divided equally among the three of you, but we've decided instead to leave the majority of our estate, approximately 75%, to charitable causes we care about. The remaining 25% will be divided among the three of you, which will still be substantial inheritance, but will be much less than you were probably expecting. The shock on our children's faces had been absolute. Jennifer had been the first to recover enough to speak. You're cutting us out of your will because we forgot Father's Day? That's incredibly petty and hurtful. David's response had been calm but firm. I'm not cutting you out of the will. You'll all still receive substantial inheritances, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $200,000 each, depending on how our investments perform over our remaining years. What I'm doing is redirecting the majority of our estate to causes that will actually appreciate the money and will use it to make difference in the world, rather than giving it all to children who've demonstrated that they value me primarily for my wallet rather than for who I am as person. You've all built successful careers and comfortable lives. You don't need massive inheritance to be financially secure. What you apparently do need is lesson about reciprocity and about relationships requiring effort rather than just being there when you want something. So that's the lesson I'm giving you this Christmas. Your mother and I will no longer be your financial safety net or your investment bank. We'll maintain relationship if you want to maintain relationship, but it will need to be genuine relationship built on mutual care and attention rather than transactional relationship where you show up when you need money and disappear when you've gotten it. The aftermath of David's announcement had been explosive. Brian had been angry, had accused David of being vindictive and of punishing them disproportionately for minor oversights and busy schedules. Jennifer had been hurt and had cried, had said that cutting their inheritance was cruel and would damage family relationships permanently. Michael had been quieter, but had clearly been shocked and upset, had tried to argue that they did care about us and that their busy schedules didn't mean they didn't value their relationship with their parents. David had listened to all their reactions calmly and then had said, "Your responses right now are telling. You're not upset that you've hurt me, or that you've taken me for granted, or that your absence on Father's Day made me feel unvalued and forgotten. You're upset that there are going to be financial consequences for how you've been treating me. That reaction confirms that I've made right decision. When you're ready to have genuine relationship that's not about money, your mother and I will be here. But the days of us always being available with financial support while you're perpetually too busy for us unless you need something, those days are over." Our children had left that Christmas morning angry and hurt, had barely said goodbye to us or to each other. The weeks following had been difficult. There'd been angry phone calls and accusatory emails, attempts to make us feel guilty for our decision, claims that we were destroying family over petty grievances, and that we'd regret this choice when we were older and needed them. But David and I had held firm. We'd followed through on changing our estate plan as we'd announced, had formalized our decision to leave majority of our estate to carefully selected charities, while leaving smaller but still substantial inheritances to our children. We'd also implemented new boundaries about financial requests. We'd made clear that we wouldn't be providing loans or investments or emergency funds going forward, that our children needed to build their own financial independence rather than relying on us as safety net. The months following had been period of adjustment and distance. Our children had been less in contact than they'd been even before Christmas, had apparently been processing what had happened and deciding how they wanted to respond. But gradually, tentatively, they'd started reaching out in ways that seemed different from before. Calls that weren't asking for anything. Invitations to family dinners that they actually followed through on. Effort to spend time with us that didn't seem to be motivated by wanting money or connections. 2 years after that Christmas morning when David had delivered his answer to their investment request and had announced changes to our estate plan, our relationships with our children had rebuilt into something healthier and more genuine than what we'd had before. They were more present, more attentive, more engaged in ways that suggested they'd learned lessons David had been trying to teach them about relationships requiring effort and reciprocity rather than just being there when you need something. Whether they'd truly internalized those lessons or whether they were just being more careful about maintaining appearances, I couldn't know for certain, but the change in their behavior was significant enough that I wanted to believe they genuinely understood that taking parents for granted while expecting continuous financial support wasn't sustainable foundation for adult family relationships. David had never regretted his decision to decline their investment request or to change our estate plan. He'd said multiple times that it had been one of most important things he'd ever done as father, not the decades of financial support and sacrifice, but the moment when he'd finally set boundary and had made clear that he deserved to be valued for who he was, rather than just for what he could provide financially. What I learned from watching David navigate that painful Christmas morning conversation, and from seeing how our family dynamics shifted in response to his boundaries, was that sometimes the most loving thing parents can do for adult children is to stop enabling dependency and entitlement. That financial generosity without reciprocal relationship creates transactional dynamic that's ultimately harmful to everyone involved, that setting boundaries and enforcing consequences for being taken for granted can actually heal relationships by forcing people to engage authentically, rather than just showing up when they want something. The shock David gave our children that Christmas morning wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was necessary wake-up call that their pattern of being too busy for us unless they needed money was unacceptable and would have real consequences. The changed estate plan wasn't punishment. It was recognition that massive inheritance wasn't necessary for their financial security, and that our money could make more difference supporting causes that would genuinely appreciate it than being divided among children who demonstrated they valued us primarily for our financial resources. My name is Carol Jensen. Our children skipped Father's Day without so much as phone call, then showed up 6 months later asking for $150,000 investment in their business opportunity. My husband listened patiently to their pitch, did thorough evaluation, and then on Christmas morning gave them answer they never expected, no to their investment request, and announcement that we were changing our estate plan to leave majority of our wealth to charity rather than to them. The shock was enormous and the aftermath was difficult, but 2 years later our relationships with our children are healthier and more genuine than they'd been in years. Sometimes the best gift parents can give adult children isn't money. It's boundary that forces them to value the relationship for what it actually is, rather than for what they can get from it. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that relationships require effort, not just convenience, please like and subscribe.